This song has the craziest backstory in country music.
He said, "You don't have to call me mister. The whole world calls me Hank."
The song was written by Gary Gentry with songwriting credits for John Detterline. Gary was the self-proclaimed biggest Hank fan in the world, and Detterline was the self-proclaimed biggest Lefty Frizzell fan in the world. So they decided they were going to write a tribute song to Hank and Lefty, and they did. But of course, that song wasn't The Ride. So that evening, Gary and Detterline were together and wrote this tribute song to Hank and Lefty. And after it was finished, Detterline went home. But there was a problem. Gary didn't think that it was good enough for Hank. Sure, he thought the song was okay, but it wasn't good enough for his hero. So Gary did what any songwriter would do. He held a seance. Now, it is important to know that at this time, Gary did have some problems with addiction. But nonetheless, he set up candles around his apartment, he turned off all of the lights, and he started antagonizing the spirit of Hank Williams. He started yelling, "Hank, why were you so big? Because you died young?" After a few minutes of this, Gary looked down his hallway, and he claims he saw Hank Williams sitting on his couch. He says he was wearing a fedora and smoking a filterless cigarette. Hank's spirit only appeared for a brief moment and disappeared, but it was in that moment that Gary says that the words to The Ride just started pouring into his head. And Gary says that he and Hank co-wrote the song together. After the song was complete, he called up Detterline in the middle of the night, and he played the song for him. And since it was Gary and Detterline that had the idea to write a tribute song, Gary gave Detterline half songwriting credits. But the story goes even deeper. You see, when Gary was a kid in the late 1950s, he was riding around on his bicycle. He had a little radio on the handlebar, and that's when he heard Hank Williams for the first time. He rushed home and told his mom, "Mom, I really want to go see Hank Williams in person." She said, "Well, son, that's just not possible because Hank Williams passed away a few years ago." Fast forward a few years, and Gary's mom took him and his grandma to Nashville. Gary had one goal in mind, and that was to see Hank Williams' house. Gary would have been about 14 years old at this time. They were out on Broadway in front of Ernest Tubbs' record shop, and Gary went up to a man in a suit and asked him if he knew where Hank's house was. The man said no, but he might. And standing next to him was Ernest Tubb, and the man in the suit was Eddie Albert. Ernest gave them directions to the house, and away they went. When they got to Hank's house, Gary jumped out of the car. His mom asked him, "Gary, what are you doing?" He said, "I just got to go knock on the door and see if I can see the inside of Hank's house." She said, "You're going to get us arrested," but he went up and knocked on the door anyway. A maid answered the door, and Gary explained to her that he was Hank's biggest fan and just really wanted to see the inside of his house. The maid said, "Well, who is that in the car?" He said, "That's my mom and grandma." The maid said, "Well, invite them in too." So Gary and his mom and grandma got to go inside of Hank's house. Gary said that his mom and grandma were really in awe over Hank's kitchen. So as they were looking at that, Gary snuck down the hallway. That's when a woman with her hair wrapped in a towel and in a robe came out of the bathroom. It was Miss Audrey Williams. Surprised, she said, "Son, can I help you?" And Gary explained to her how he had came to be in her house. So very kindly, Miss Audrey gave him the grand tour. She showed him Hank Jr.'s bedroom, and she even showed him the blue Cadillac that Hank had passed away in. As they left the house, Gary said, "Miss Audrey, thank you for showing me all of Mr. Williams' things." And Miss Audrey responded, "You don't have to call him Mr. Son. The whole world called him Hank." And that line stuck with Gary until the night that he wrote The Ride. Now fast forward, and The Ride has already been released, and it's a big hit. Gary got invited to do a show at the Opry House, and he was asked to perform The Ride. And when he got to the line, "Now you don't have to call me Mr. the whole world called me Hank," as soon as he said Hank, all of the lights in the building went off. Gary believes that this was the return of Hank's ghost. If you enjoyed this story, let me know what other stories you would like me to cover. Don't forget to hit the like and subscribe to the channel and hit the little notification bell. I appreciate y'all.